My name is Anahit Shahnazarian and I am going to talk about juvenile corrections. This chapter focuses on controlling juvenile delinquency, not eliminating it. Most social problems are never fully eliminated, despite multi-million, billion-dollar programs and armies of professionals committed to remove of the problems such as crime, suicide, mental illness, and juvenile delinquency. Some efforts to eliminate a social problem may in fact only help to create other problems. As the labeling perspective indicates, identifying and then treating a child as a pre-delinquent may in fact later create the very phenomenon that one is trying to prevent. This should not discourage for seeking programs aimed at controlling social problems such as delinquency. A pragmatic objective is to develop realistic social mechanisms for reducing and controlling delinquency. Therefore, social control are those aspects of society and culture which are designed to reduce the incidence of juvenile delinquency and to minimize its negative impact on members of society. Every society establishes norms to regulate human behavior and provides guidelines for social interaction. Societies have established numerous ways of dealing with those individuals who violate the norms of their society. These methods of enforcing norms are referred to as sanctions and can be either positive or negative. When people conform to normative expectation, they receive positive sanctions in the form of respect, honors, awards, and social acceptance. When they violate norms, their behavior is negatively sanctioned or punished in an attempt to control their behavior. These methods of social control can be divided into three general categories: voluntary, informal, and formal. Social control and deterrence theory. Deterrence theory is a device will be discouraged of social sanctions for non-conformity are perceived to be certain, swift, and severe. Deterrence theory assumes that juveniles are rational, logical beings who prefer to be rewarded for their conformity rather than be punished for their deviance. The theory contends that in youths know the meaningful social sanctions will be forthcoming, they are less likely to commit delinquent acts. Therefore, the goal of society is to sanction juvenile delinquency in such a way as to incorporate elements of both specific and general deterrence. This is difficult, however, as some people may be more affected by one type of deterrence than another, and some youths learn only from personal experience. This is a specific deterrence, while others can learn from the experience of others, which is a key of general deterrence. The media getting tough on crime. Get tough on crime attitudes have led to implementation of policing strategies and court decisions that reflect a general effort to treat delinquency more seriously and in some cases to treat juvenile delinquents more like adult criminals. Many Americans believe that their homes, streets, and schools were no longer safe. Some might insist that increasing crime rates and incidence of violent crimes in schools justify just feeling and policies. Others, operating from a conflict perspective, would argue that the lawmakers themselves help create and maintain fearful attitudes towards certain types of crime and delinquency in order to get attention away from white-collar crimes and early deviance and to allow the state to implement more social control over working and lower-class individuals more likely to be involved in crimes and a street crime that could be framed as threats.
There are many different ways you can get initiated into a gang, such as getting beat up by the gang, mugging somebody, or killing someone in a drive-by. Women, they have to sleep with someone that has HIV if they want to get into a female gang. Frederick Thrasher said that every gang is unique in their own ways. Some can be very organized or some can be really disorganized. The really more organized groups, they have regular meetings and they have like presidents and vice presidents like to keep everything organized. The lower gangs, they just meet in whatever corner they can find.
The most fundamental and effective method of social control is voluntary control, which most members of society impose upon themselves. Voluntary social control is depend upon effective socialization so that societal members internalize the shared values and norms of their society. The socialization process involves not only teaching social norms to societal members but also causing individuals to believe in the moral and ethical validity of those norms. That's why the teaching of social values, attitudes about the rightness and the wrongness of acts is just as important as teaching people the appropriateness of acts. Some sociological theories of juvenile delinquency claim that inadequate or unsuccessful socialization leads to delinquency. For example, the social learning theory contended that delinquency as well as the conformity must be learned through socialization. The most major agent of socialization that helps a juvenile internalize society's norm are family, religion, school, mass media, and peers. Walter Reckles emphasized social control as being the primary distinguished element between those who commit and those who refrain from committing delinquency acts. The first layer of insulation against delinquency in Reckles' control theory is that of inner containment. This inner containment is primarily as a result of effective socialization. When juveniles internalize society's values and norms as their own, they are much less likely to violate those values and norms. This element of voluntary social control relies upon the individual set of values to act as sufficient barrier to committing delinquency acts. Another aspect of voluntary social control developed through effective socialization is the process whereby individuals acknowledge their membership in society and stimulously recognize society as a being part of them, often referred to as a social bond. This acknowledgement promotes the conformity to social norm and helps prevent involvement in delinquent act. We also have informal social control when the internalization of social norm is insufficient for an individual to maintain behavior control. It may be necessary for the social group to implement a second line of defense against deviance. Informal social control mechanism, which includes tactics as a gossip, ridicule, humor, ostracism, peer pressure. We also have the mine shaft community is characterized by a smaller population, less complex division of labor, and is dominated by primarily face-to-face interaction. And this type of community informal mechanism dominates social control strategies because they are so effective in this type of social structure. We also have ostracism. The experience of being expelled from a social group may serve as one of the most powerful and effective informal social control mechanism available to interact with others and can be extremely punitive. On the negative side, if the group is encouraging delinquency and otherwise conforming, youngsters may feel compelled to break the law in order to gain acceptance by others. On the positive side, if the peer group demands conformity to the law, the juvenile whose inner containment is not strong enough to prevent delinquency may be sufficiently concentrated by the group. Some of the informal strategy for dealing with less serious juvenile offenders have included trying to involve them in what are considered to be positive activities with more desirable peers and role models. Problem juveniles often are encouraged to join baseball and soccer team, YMCA, and other youth organizations in that hope that these juveniles will be less inclined to become involved in delinquency.
Formal social control. Genus-scav societies characterized by large populations, a complex division in labor, secondary relationships, and formal social control. Petty crime is sometimes accepted in smaller rural areas. Schools, police, and courts are agents of social control. Varying degrees of formal punishment, suspension, and expulsion are ways in which schools officials can negatively sanction students' undesirable behavior. The police can also utilize both informal and formal techniques of control. Social control mechanisms such as gossip and ridicule come from neighbors. Juvenile probation. The most widely used method of formal social control for juveniles in the United States is probation. Probation is a form of supervised release in which the juvenile identified as a delinquent is allowed to remain free from institutionalization, but must adhere to a strict set of guidelines imposed by the courts. The youth is required to report to probation officer on regular dates. John Augustus of Boston in 1841 created probation. Probation is assumed to provide outer constraint for the juvenile while helping to resocialize the youth in a new set of values. Probation combines both punitive and rehabilitative aspects of juvenile corrections. Shock probation involves a short stay in prison to shock the youth straight.
Juvenile training schools are long-term facilities for housing juveniles and serve as a comparison to adult prisons. Every state has at least one of these facilities. Long-term incarcerated facilities conform to the total concept of total institution, a place of residence and work where a large number of like-situated individuals are cut off from the wider society for an appropriate amount of time and together lead an enclosed life. As these prisons intimidate adult prisons, they have stabbings, fights, rapes, and they are a part of the institutionalized life in many of these facilities. The found youth in both maximum youth facilities and prisons have lost sight of getting out and instead adapt to the institutionalized life imposed on them. Another section is group homes. A third of the category of juvenile institutions revolve around the concept of group homes. This program involved in a group home setting allow a limited amount of juveniles to live together under staff supervision while working and going to school. The program was highly successful and has been copied in other parts of the country. However, research does show that placement in these group settings may increase delinquency.
Private facilities. There are a number of privately operated juvenile institutions across the United States. In fact, there are almost twice as many private as public facilities. Although private facilities hold only about half as many juveniles, need declined.
David Sikor and Clemens Bartolas found, however, that many private juvenile facilities suffered from some of the same problems as state-run institutions. Complicating the problems further, they noted was that the desire to make profits in the private sector sometimes leads to a higher residence to staff ratio and inadequate professional services. Juvenile aftercare. Aftercare for juveniles is the equivalent of parole for adults. In fact, in some states, the term juvenile parole is still used. Aftercare refers to release of a juvenile who has been incarcerated in some type of institutional setting under the supervision of an officer of the court for a prescribed period of time. Upon release, the juvenile meets with an aftercare supervisor and agrees to a specific set of restrictions. They usually include requirements such as school attendance, curfew, notification of whereabouts, and often a list of specific individuals with whom the juvenile is forbidden to associate violation. Today, there is more interest than ever in effectively reintegrating juvenile offenders back into the community under supervised release and intensive aftercare. But studies reveal that aftercare has not been very effective. Consequently, it is often difficult for probation and aftercare officers to meet regularly with all their charges, and some juveniles may be able to violate some of the conditions for their release without it coming to the attention of their supervised. Its effectiveness is significantly reduced. Juveniles in adult jails and prisons. Across the United States, thousands of children have been sentenced as adults and sent to adult prisons between 2000 and 2010. Despite the fact that Congress passed a law in 1980 calling for the removal of all juveniles from adult jails, various states' statutes and judicial practices allow juveniles to be incarcerated in adult jails. In 2002, Congress passed the Juvenile Justice Delinquency Prevention Act, which became effective on October 1, 2003. The goals of the act were to assist state and local governments in preventing and controlling juvenile delinquency and to improve the juvenile justice system. Capital punishment for juveniles. In 1972, the United States Supreme Court ruled in the case of Foreman, Georgia, that capital punishment was discriminatory and constituted cruel and unusual punishment, which is prohibited by the Eighth Amendment to the Constitution. However, in 1976, the Supreme Court ruled that 3 states, Florida, Texas, and Georgia, had rewritten their capital punishment status in such a way as to conform to the Constitution. 27 states enacted capital punishment statutes that specifies a minimum age at the time that crime was committed, and several of those set the minimum age below the age majority.
Deinstitutionalization, community corrections, and diversion. Deinstitutionalization means avoiding the placement of juveniles in correctional institutions. Deinstitutionalization is pursued for non-serious juvenile offenders. Jerome Staffelder disagreed with imprisonment of youth, claiming that it removes youth from the society they must learn to adapt and then exposes them to hundreds of criminal peers, models, and to behaviors they haven't learned. And punishment is the only learning principle to change behavior. Jerome Staffelder suggested using 9 social learning techniques: institutional programming, behavioral family contracting, social skills training, probation contracting, school programming, clinical behavior therapy, employment skills training, group treatment homes, community change and prevention. House arrest, a program in which youth are confined to their homes and closely supervised by their parents, with routine unannounced visits